Alright, so this is the first time anybody ever paid me to build something for them. And the project came about because last summer, I replaced the railing to the exterior stairs of our house. And a neighbor liked it and approached me to see if I would want to build one inside of her house, going from her first floor down to the basement. Now, initially I was hesitant to take the job on, namely because I'd never worked on an interior before. I'm not a contractor by any stretch of the imagination. I've only hammer drilled some tapcons down into some concrete when I installed my railing, and that's pretty much the install experience that I have. So it did kind of freak me out a little bit using somebody else's house as a guinea pig, but she assured me that she was cool with it, essentially telling me you gotta start somewhere. So this is where I started. It didn't take very long before I ran into my first problem. Self-inflicted, of course. And what I did was, when I was modeling the railing on Shaper 3D, which I'm a complete novice at, I decided to try and add the decorative rounded trim of each step to the model, which I was able to do, but what happened was I didn't account for the difference in the horizontal travel of each step when I did that. So, in other words, I ended up building this first part to a completely different slope than what was actually needed. Luckily for me, she lives right down the street, so when I brought the rough frame over to her house and put it in place, I was able to catch the mistake before committing further to the build. But that did mean that I essentially had to start from scratch. Okay, so I don't know how many views this video is going to get. Probably not a lot, but what I do know is that there's a greater than zero chance that somebody's going to yell at me for not having a guard on my angle grinder. And that's fair. That's a fair criticism. And in fact, I've already been admonished by a Russian fellow, or at least a Russian speaker in one of my previous shorts about this very thing. And I can only promise to do better. So hopefully for future videos, you'll see that I have guards on my angle grinders. You gotta stay safe out there, kids. A little bit earlier, I mentioned the phrase, you gotta start somewhere. Now, this phrase has become a bit of a mantra for me, not just for this project, but kind of across the board as I've been navigating the early stages of owning a business and putting myself out there on social media. And me doing this voiceover really is a pretty good example of that. I always assumed that I would at some point add some kind of narration to these longer form videos, but up until this one, I always created some kind of undetermined resistance to doing so. At first, I thought it was that thing about hearing your own voice on tape and how gross that is. But ultimately, what I think it is I'm sitting here jabbering into a microphone. I think it's no different than the resistance I had to even accepting this project in the first place. I think it's just the natural resistance you face when you're doing or starting something new. And for this project, I was able to push through that with a pretty simple calculus, which was I'd be an idiot not to take a paid job. And as far as the voiceover goes, I think I just reached the point where I figured if I know I'm going to do it eventually, why not do it now? You gotta start somewhere, right? All right, well, I guess it'd be worth talking a little bit about the project itself. At this point, I'm pretty much back to where I was before I had to break those pieces off earlier, and I'm feeling pretty confident. I was able to bring the frame back over to the customer's house and fit it to the stairs, and it looked pretty good. But I still left myself a little bit of wiggle room to make adjustments. You know, if I had to add a 1/4 inch here or take a 1/4 inch away there, I'd be able to do that to hopefully make sure that the thing fits perfectly in the end. Now there's one part of the build process, whether I'm building a railing or I'm building a metal frame for a coffee table, whatever it is, and that's ensuring that 2 pieces of metal are flush at the point where they come together. And the reason this is important is because if that joint is flush, if those 2 pieces of metal are flush and you go to weld them, then you can grind that weld down and it could be almost perfectly blended in and give that seamless appearance that usually I'm going for. If those 2 pieces of metal are not flush with one another, then when you go to grind that weld down, you inevitably take a little bit more of the material away from one side of that joint, and it could cause divots that can be seen pretty obviously. Now, some people, to address this, will just use Bondo. You know, they'll slap some Bondo on it, it'll smooth everything out, and put a coat of paint over that and call it a day. And in some instances, I'm sure that's the way to go, and there are reasons that justify doing that, but in my mind, that's cheating. And personally, I don't really mind seeing some of those flaws, even through a coat of paint, because it reminds me that the thing is handmade. And I know this is sort of a personal preference, and maybe I'm just kind of justifying it in my own mind that, you know, I'm not getting these perfectly seamless joints, but hey, you know, the stories we tell ourselves, right? And anyway, in this case, for this railing, for most of the build, I was under the impression that we were going to put a coat of paint on it. And when you do that, when you put a couple coats of paint on a metal frame, it usually does a pretty good job at masking any of those imperfections that could have come about from the grinding process. But after a couple conversations with my neighbor about how she wanted to finish this thing, she insisted that she was cool with the few imperfections that there were on it, that the exposed welds and the raw metal and the grinder marks and the other telltale signs from the build process all added up to giving this thing the handmade quality that she was looking for. And who would I be if I'd try to convince her otherwise? I mean, I guess we could have tried to put some Bondo on it and put some paint over that, but I would have told her I'm hesitant to do it because I'd never worked with Bondo before, and she probably would have told me, you gotta start somewhere. And see what I did? Yeah. Anyway, I'm super happy with how this thing came out. It looks great in the space with the raw steel look, and for my first paid job, I think it went pretty well. If you've made it this far in the video, and I can't believe I'm about to do this for the first time, but I really would appreciate it if you could do all the things that people do when they enjoy watching YouTube videos. And I promise I will put guards on my grinders. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.